call your name. Days get long, I call your name. Days get broken, set my spirit free. Oh, Lord, remember me.
Well, welcome to our Tuesday evening teaching sessions. This is session 7, and we're continuing to look at the book of Judges. And this evening, primarily, we're focusing in on Judges chapter 9. Throughout the journey that we've already undertaken, as far as the book is concerned, there is that deep sense of not just a repetitive cycle of events, but that sense of spiraling downwards. And clearly, with the story of Gideon, although it's a much loved story, towards the end of it, you do get that sense that things are continuing to move in the wrong direction. But once we come into chapter 9 and we focus in on the story of one of his sons, Abimelech, this really begins to hasten that whole process of things becoming just worse and worse through the actions of those who should know better because they've had the opportunity to learn from their ancestors, the values that the Jewish people and their relationship with God should really have helped them to do life in a better way. As we move into chapter 9, you'll notice that there's the connection between the ending of chapter 8 and the beginning of chapter 9, and that is rooted in a very simple word, and the word is to rule over. And that's the fundamental question being asked here, right at the opening of this chapter. Who exactly is it that rules over the tribes of Israel? And of course, the emphasis throughout these opening chapters and into chapter 9 is really focused again on the relationship between truth and integrity and the well-being of the people. If truth and integrity is maintained, then the people prosper. But of course, that is not the case. And so we get into another phase that we would describe as spiraling out of control consistently downwards. So who is it who will rule over Israel? Well, I guess at the end of chapter 8, we may well have got the impression that Gideon was very wise in how he approached that subject. Even though the people wanted to make him king, he really responded by simply saying, the only king who rules over you should, of course, be Yahweh, the God of Israel. That Gideon himself, nor any of his sons in the future, should rule over the nation. Now, seemingly, that was a very emphatic statement. And, of course, looking at it, on the surface, that seems to be the right kind of response. But then Gideon's behavior suggests something else. Because, of course, we see that towards the end of chapter 8, he begins to lead his people in the wrong direction. He leads them to the worship of other gods. He establishes a shrine in his own village, which of course people would flock to worship at. And of course that in itself suggests that Gideon was beginning to set himself up and his village up as being a real focus for the worship of Baal and other Canaanites' gods. So towards the end of that chapter, you really get that sense that although what he says sounds plausible and indeed right, his actions suggest a very different outlook on the future. And because of that, Gideon is sowing some very bad seeds. And of course, inevitably, when you sow bad seeds, that will reap the fruits of self-assertion and ultimately, as we will see in this chapter, violence. So before we hear this chapter being read, it's worth noting that this particular chapter doesn't follow that formula that we have been using up to this point, what we call that cycle that you've had the opportunity to see time and time again. And so this chapter is different in format, but it also leads downwards. It's part of that whole process of things becoming worse and worse. And just a little note, just in case you had that feeling that God was very harsh on the people of Canaan, the Canaanites, what we will see in this particular chapter is that his judgments fall on his own people, Israel. So it's ironic to see that Israel itself here almost takes on the nature of the Canaanites. And as we've stated elsewhere in the other teaching sessions, the very name Canaanites suggests something that is out of control, something that is neglecting the very nature of justice and righteousness and truth and integrity. So Israel, in this chapter 9, in one sense, take on the mantle of the Canaanites. So I've invited my friend, David Suchet, who's a noted actor and, of course, reader of Scripture, and he's going to read chapter 9 for us.
Judges chapter 9. Abimelech, son of Jerubbaal, went to his mother's brothers in Shechem and said to them and to all his mother's clan, "Ask all the citizens of Shechem, which is better for you, to have all 70 of Jerubbaal's sons rule over you, or just one man? Remember, I am your flesh and blood." When the brothers repeated all this to the citizens of Shechem, they were inclined to follow Abimelech, for they said, "He is related to us." They gave him 70 shekels of silver from the temple of Baal-berith, and Abimelech used it to hire reckless scoundrels who became his followers. He went to his father's home in Ophrah, and on one stone murdered his 70 brothers, the sons of Jerubbaal. But Jotham, the youngest son of Jerubbaal, escaped by hiding. Then all the citizens of Shechem and Beth Millo gathered beside the great tree at the pillar in Shechem to crown Abimelech king. When Jotham was told about this, he climbed up on the top of Mount Gerizim and shouted to them, "Listen to me, citizens of Shechem, so that God may listen to you." One day the trees went out to anoint a king for themselves. They said to the olive tree, "Be our king." But the olive tree answered, "Should I give up my oil, by which both gods and humans are honored, to hold sway over the trees?" Next, the trees said to the fig tree, "Come and be our king." But the fig tree replied, "Should I give up my fruit so good and sweet, to hold sway over the trees?" Then the trees said to the vine, "Come and be our king." But the vine answered, "Should I give up my wine, which cheers both gods and humans, to hold sway over the trees?" Finally, all the trees said to the thorn bush, "Come and be our king." The thorn bush said to the trees, "If you really want to anoint me king over you, come and take refuge in my shade. But if not, then let fire come out of the thorn bush and consume the cedars of Lebanon." Have you acted honorably and in good faith by making Abimelech king? Have you been fair to Jerubbaal and his family? Have you treated him as he deserves? Remember that my father fought for you and risked his life to rescue you from the hand of Midian. But today you have revolted against my father's family. You have murdered his 70 sons on a single stone, and have made Abimelech, the son of his female slave, king over the citizens of Shechem because he is related to you. So have you acted honorably and in good faith towards Jerubbaal and his family today? If you have, may Abimelech be your joy, and may you be his too. But if you have not, let fire come out from Abimelech and consume you, the citizens of Shechem and Beth Millo, and let fire come out from you, the citizens of Shechem and Beth Millo, and consume Abimelech. Then Jotham fled, escaping to Beer, and he lived there because he was afraid of his brother Abimelech. After Abimelech had governed Israel for 3 years, God stirred up animosity between Abimelech and the citizens of Shechem, so that they acted treacherously against Abimelech. God did this in order that the crime against Jerubbaal's 70 sons, the shedding of their blood, might be avenged on their brother Abimelech and on the citizens of Shechem who had helped him murder his brothers. In opposition to him, these citizens of Shechem set men on the hilltops to ambush and rob everyone who passed by, and this was reported to Abimelech. Now Gaal, son of Ebed, moved with his clan into Shechem, and its citizens put their confidence in him. After they had gone out into the fields and gathered the grapes and trodden them, they held a festival in the temple of their God. While they were eating and drinking, they cursed Abimelech. Then Gaal, son of Ebed, said, "Who is Abimelech, and why should we Shechemites be subject to him? Isn't he Jerubbaal's son, and isn't Zebul his deputy? Serve the family of Hamor, Shechem's father. Why should we serve Abimelech? If only this people were under my command, then I would get rid of him. I would say to Abimelech, 'Call out your whole army.'" When Zebul, the governor of the city, heard what Gaal, son of Ebed, said, he was very angry. Under cover, he sent messengers to Abimelech, saying, "Gaal, son of Ebed, and his clan have come to Shechem, and are stirring up the city against you. Now then, during the night, you and your men should come and lie in wait in the fields. In the morning at sunrise, advance against the city. When Gaal and his men come out against you, seize the opportunity to attack them." So Abimelech and all his troops set out by night and took up concealed positions near Shechem in 4 companies. Now Gaal, son of Ebed, had gone out and was standing at the entrance of the city gate, just as Abimelech and his troops came out from their hiding place. When Gaal saw them, he said to Zebul, "Look, people are coming down from the tops of the mountains." Zebul replied, "You mistake the shadows of the mountains for men." But Gaal spoke up again, "Look, people are coming down from the central hill, and a company is coming from the direction of the diviner's tree." Then Zebul said to him, "Where is your big talk now, you who said, 'Who is Abimelech that we should be subject to him?' Aren't these the men you ridiculed? Go out and fight them." So Gaal led out the citizens of Shechem and fought Abimelech. Abimelech chased him all the way to the entrance of the gate, and many were killed as they fled. Then Abimelech stayed in Arumah, and Zebul drove Gaal and his clan out of Shechem. The next day the people of Shechem went out to the fields, and this was reported to Abimelech. So he took his men, divided them into 3 companies, and set an ambush in the fields. When he saw the people coming out of the city, he rose to attack them. Abimelech and the companies with him rushed forwards to a position at the entrance of the city gate. Then 2 companies attacked those in the fields and struck them down. All that day Abimelech pressed his attack against the city until he had captured it and killed its people. Then he destroyed the city and scattered salt over it. On hearing this, the citizens in the tower of Shechem went into the stronghold of the temple of El-Berith. When Abimelech heard that they had assembled there, he and all his men went up Mount Zalmon. He took an axe and cut off some branches, which he lifted to his shoulders. He ordered the men with him, "Quick, do what you have seen me do." So all the men cut branches and followed Abimelech. They piled them against the stronghold and set it on fire with the people still inside. So all the people in the tower of Shechem, about 1,000 men and women, also died. Next Abimelech went to Thebez and besieged it and captured it. Inside the city, however, was a strong tower to which all the men and women, all the people of the city, had fled. They had locked themselves in and climbed up on the tower roof. Abimelech went to the tower and attacked it. But as he approached the entrance to the tower to set it on fire, a woman dropped an upper millstone on his head and cracked his skull. Hurriedly he called to his armor-bearer, "Draw your sword and kill me, so that they can't say, 'A woman killed him.'" So his servant ran him through, and he died. When the Israelites saw that Abimelech was dead, they went home. Thus God repaid the wickedness that Abimelech had done to his father by murdering his 70 brothers. God also made the people of Shechem pay for all their wickedness. The curse of Jotham, son of Jerubbaal, came on them.
Right from the outset of chapter 9, we're introduced to Abimelech. It's interesting that his name means "my father is king," which of course is significant. And from this point onwards, Gideon is named Jerubbaal, which of course was that name that was given to him when he broke down the altar in his own village to Baal and the Ashereth pole. So it's interesting to note that, because that inevitably with the author is quite significant. He's using a name that is applied, or a name that you would locate within more of the Canaanite fertility worship than Gideon, which would of course be his more natural Jewish or Hebrew name. So Abimelech, although he's described as a son of Gideon, if you refer back to chapter 8, and particularly verses 30 to 31, you soon discover that in fact he was not among the 70 true sons of Gideon, but he was the son of Gideon's concubine, who was from Shechem, and Shechem will become very significant within chapter 9. So instantly you get that sense that here is someone who's outside of the true bloodline, the descendants of Gideon in that way. Maybe there are overtones here that takes us right back into the book of Genesis with the story of Abraham and Ishmael, and that link between the concubine, the son of the concubine, bringing about problems for the future, for the immediate. So it's not surprising right at the very beginning of the chapter, if Abimelech is going to make a bid to be ruler over his people, over the nation of Israel, then the natural place for him, of course, to go is to Shechem. That's where his mother came from. And immediately he asks that question, who do you want to rule over you? Will you have the 70 sons of Gideon rule over you? Or will you have one who is your own? I am a child of Shechem, his argument. Well, it's quite natural, therefore, that the people of Shechem make their choice and they choose to support him in his bid to become king. It's interesting that the money that's provided to support him in that task comes from the temple of Baal-berith. And again, that shows the link between the things that are happening, which are totally out of sync with God's heart and will, and of course, the worship of other gods, particularly in this case, Canaanite fertility gods. So it's money raised through idolatry that will be used to kill the 70 sons of Gideon, which again is quite symbolic. The message is clear. Gideon has made a huge error of judgment, and it's his sons who ultimately now are going to pay the price for it. And of course, that's exactly what happens. But as the story begins to unfold, we see that one of the sons, and we're not told how, manages to escape from the massacre. And his name is Jotham. And Jotham is going to be used in the story to provide some sense of prophetic challenge. And it's immediately, the chapter takes us to that moment where Jotham climbs the mountain and he overlooks the city of Shechem. And there, in that setting, on the mountain, which of course is significant throughout the Old Testament and into the New Testament, he brings his prophetic challenge. Of course, Gerizim, Mount Gerizim, was a place of covenant commitments. We find that in Deuteronomy chapter 11 and again in Deuteronomy chapter 27. So it's a location with great significance, and he's deliberately chosen it as the location to challenge the people of Shechem about their covenant commitments. The message is quite clear, even though it uses a whole series of metaphors. I don't think we can read it without realizing that Abimelech is the thorn bush or the brambles in the story, in the parable that unfolds for us. Though you might think that the message is anti-monarchy, I don't think it is per se. I think it's just opposed to the choice of ruler, not the idea or the concept of having a ruler per se. Jotham's argument is that if what has happened, this terrible massacre and Abimelech's bid to become king, is an act of justice and righteousness, then of course things will be okay. The outcomes will be good. But if the reverse is true, and Abimelech has betrayed his own and is seeking to oppose or overthrow the role or the rule of Yahweh, the God of Israel, then Shechem as a city will be caught up in mutual destruction. I think what Jotham is simply saying is that in reality, truth and integrity and justice has been completely trampled on. And of course, following that moment, that courageous moment, where he stands in the place of the prophet and brings his prophetic message of warning, Jotham then disappears and heads off into what we could describe as self-imposed exile. We're then told in chapter 9 that this moves on to a period of 3 years when Abimelech governs the tribes. The word that's being used there, the Hebrew word that's being used, is an interesting one because it implies he mastered Israel. So the suggestion is that he was fairly oppressive in the way he brought about his own rule over the people. Up to this point, it's quite noticeable that there has been no reference to the sovereignty of God. And I think the author wants to draw our attention to the fact that though it's not overtly stated, God is still sovereign and he's still at work. And he does that by telling us that God sends an evil spirit. Now, how we understand an evil spirit is a matter of debate, of question. This could be some supernatural manifestation, or it could simply be that a spirit of disunity settled on the people of Shechem. But whatever else we can say about that, a wedge is being driven between the residents of Shechem and Abimelech himself after this 3-year period of rule. Now, all of this, because the author is shortening the story for us so that he can squeeze it into the amount of material that he's got time to give to us, it does appear to be quite sketchy. And you have that sense the author wants to move up the story onwards quite deliberately. And of course, that's because the story is about to take another turn. And the author wants us to say, well, why is that? Why is that happening again in that particular way? And that turn surrounds another character that we're introduced at this point, a man called Gol. It can become a little bit confusing, the story at this point, but let's focus on what is seemingly fairly straightforward. It appears that Gol in Shechem becomes the focus of a rebellion, an uprising against the rule of Abimelech. Now, we're not told how that should be or how that comes about, simply that this begins to ignite the people of Shechem, and there's that sense that the people are beginning to become very rebellious towards the one, Abimelech, who they initially supported. And the way that Gol does that, he plays very much on this idea that Abimelech, in fact, is not a true son of Gideon. He's not one of those true bloodline sons of Gideon. So therefore, if that's the case, why on earth are they listening to him? But then the story takes another little twist. In the town of Shechem, Abimelech has an ally, and his name is Zebul. He's the governor, and it's he that gets this message out to Abimelech that he needs to come and respond to this threat. And not only does he alert him to this rebellion that's taken place, but also he gives him the strategy for coming and re-establishing his control, his rule, his mastering of the people of Shechem. So you get that final moment when a very interesting conversation takes place between Zebul, the ally of Abimelech, and of course Gol, who's opposed to Abimelech. They stand outside the city gate, and it's first light. And of course what we're told is that Abimelech and his forces are hiding just outside the city gates. And in the dim twilight, Gaul thinks that he can see movement, human movement. And of course, what Zebul says to him is, no, it's just the shadows. It's the mountains creating these shadows. But then Gaul is goaded by Zebul, and the disclosure that in fact this isn't the shadows of the mountain, but this is in fact an army. Zebul golds him and says, well, come on, you've talked a good game. Now you better get out there and fight one. And of course, the outcome of that is that Gaul is overpowered and he's forced to flee. The outcome of that is a part fulfillment of Jotham's curse, which he has brought from that prophetic mountain where he has stood over the city. And of course, the city of Shechem and its residents are absolutely destroyed by Abimelech and his forces. And not only that, but salt is scattered all over the ground, which of course creates pollution, and it makes the ground unsuitable, totally unsuitable for any further settlement. It's almost like cursing the ground. It's brutal, but of course it's very decisive. And now Abimelech is on a bit of a roll, because he now turns his attention to another stronghold, which he feels is equally rebellious. It's the stronghold of El-Berith. And likewise, in the same way that all the citizens of Shechem are destroyed, so it is with the citizens in the stronghold of El-Berith. The message is clear. Abimelech is acting like a madman. He's fueled by his need for revenge and to regain control and his rule over the people, over the tribes. But then there's another twist that comes in the story, not in some senses one that we're unfamiliar with from the book of Judges, but Abimelech meets his fate as Jotham had prophesied he would, when he leads an attack on another city called Hebez. As he leads his forces against this city, a woman, we're told, is hiding in the tower, and she throws down a millstone which cracks open his head. Now again, you get the same thing happening here that we've already read of in the book of Judges, that rather than die at the hands of a woman, he asks his armor bearer to finish him off. Because of course, for a warrior king to be killed by a woman was considered to be the ultimate disgrace within this context and within this situation. It's interesting because the role of women within those early chapters of Judges has been very decisive and very significant and very important. But there will be, from this point onwards, no longer the sense that they are the true heroines of the stories that we've read. From now on, they will become victims, vulnerable and exposed to exploitation and abuse. God clearly has acted, and the curse of Jotham has been fulfilled. It's an incredible story with a lot of sequences in it. But I hope that as you work your way through it, and as we've thought about it together, at least some of it has become a little bit more clear for us.
chains get broken, set my body free. Oh, Lord, remember me, remember me. Set my spirit free. Oh, Lord, remember me. When these chains get broken, set my spirit free.